Story for Steven, the first in 2, so far, flashback episodes that tell the story of Greg when he was a young hip rocker dude. And I just said young hip rocker dude. Am I still allowed on the internet after saying that? All joking aside, this is a fantastic episode, and quite frankly, it's hard to articulate why. Mostly because the episode so effectively speaks for itself. The episode opens with Steven actually spending time with Greg overnight. He is getting to spend some time with his father overnight. It's raining, they're both in Greg's van, and Greg is tucking Steven into sleep. And Steven happens upon this picture of Greg with this older guy, and asks who it is, and Greg describes him as Marty, an old friend who is now dead to him. Which is one thing I do want to touch on a little bit as this review goes by, but we'll get to that when we get to it. And Greg basically says to Steven that Marty is part of the story of how Rose and Greg met, and he's just left Marty out of the story in all the times that he's told it to Steven. Which is such a clever way to explain why Greg is telling this story to Steven, when it's a story that, logically speaking, Steven should already know. Greg told it to Steven, but he edited out this guy that he didn't really like anymore. That's some very good writing. So anyway, of course, Steven wants to hear the version of the story with Marty in it, so Greg gears up to tell the story, and he cold opens with a song at one of his concerts, Comet or Like a Comet, which is one of the best sounding musical numbers in the entire run of the show. In fact, when I did my top 10 Steven Universe songs video not too long ago, I rated it as number 10, and I would have rated it higher, except that it doesn't really have that much to do with the overreaching story of the show. Though, to be fair, having listened to it a couple more times for this review, I've actually decided to make it the focus of my next song analysis. And it is a great song. I recommend that you go and listen to it right now. Just pause this video, go search for it on YouTube, listen to it, get yourself pumped up for this episode, because it really does get you pumped up for this episode. And one of my favorite parts of this flashback when he is describing this song number to Steven is he describes it as if it's this really high-cost, high-production value music video. He clearly doesn't describe it as just Greg standing on the stage singing. And I bet every time he would sing that song on tour, that was exactly the scenario that was going through his head. This outer space rock ballad scenario that he would put into a music video if he ever got the chance. I bet he dreamed all of that up himself. But then, as the song comes to an end and we fade back into reality, you realize that he was singing to effectively no one. There is only one person in the audience, and it's Rose. And she's clearly impressed by the song, so when Greg goes over to take over the merchandise table, since his manager, Marty, is not there doing his job, Rose actually comes up to talk to him. And I just want to point out something cute that you might overlook when watching this episode. If you look on the table where he has all of his merchandise, he has Mr. Universe t-shirts, and then Star t-shirts, and they're the same pink Star t-shirts that Steven wears now. Now, the idea when Greg was on tour that those were probably the smaller sized ones for women and probably kids too, but now Steven wears them every day. I just think that's really cute that Greg's old life was able to contribute in this small way to his new life. It's also just a really cute detail to throw in there because up to this point we don't know why Steven wears all the same shirt all the time. Anyway, Greg and Rose talk to each other. They're clearly flirting with each other. And Greg gives Rose a free CD and then wants to give her a free t-shirt, but he doesn't have a size big enough for her on the table. So he runs back to the van to get one. And there's Marty in the back of the van with Vidalia, who we haven't actually met properly yet in the series. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what they were doing back there. They were making sour cream. That's what they were doing. And I just realized if you don't understand the context of that, it sounds really bad. This is sour cream. This is a character. His name is Sour Cream. They were making sour cream. Jeez. Anyway, Rose leaves. She's kind of run off, and Greg follows after her, and he ends up at the beach outside of the temple, and it's all fenced up. There's no way really into it without climbing over this fence. It has a keep out sign on it, and then it has please written in what is clearly Pearl's handwriting. I just think that's another adorable detail to put in there that they didn't have to put in. But it actually adds so much to the episode. And Greg doesn't know for sure that that's where she went, obviously, but then a purple owl starts talking to him because Amethyst can't leave well enough alone. And that sparks Greg's interest in the place, so he climbs over the fence, runs to the temple, he meets all the gems when they were younger and wearing different outfits because this is like the 70s at this point. And it's pretty clear that they haven't had any direct interaction with humans for a long time. And they're going to throw him back over the fence. Quite literally, Garnet is going to chuck him back over the fence until Rose comes out of her room and basically saves his life. I mean, not literally, Garnet wouldn't kill him, but it probably would have hurt. Let's put it that way. she comes out and saves him. She thinks he's adorable because his gimmick is space and he's using his space gimmick on them, like the space lingo and stuff, not realizing that they're aliens. It's just very cute in that cheeky kind of way. Anyway, Greg gives Rose the t-shirt. They kind of flirt a little bit more, and then he leaves. And he says, I hope the stars align for us to meet each other again, or something along those lines. Now he's off to, I don't know where, I can't remember where they were going next, but he's off to perform another concert, and while he's in the car, while he's in his van with Marty, and Marty is driving them to the next location, he starts saying all this rude stuff, and you could tell from Greg's reaction that it's the kind of thing that Marty says a lot, and he just puts it out of mind. But basically, Marty's being a sexist pig, and Greg clearly doesn't like it, and you kind of get the sense that Greg is, at this point, starting to realize that this person is intriguing enough to him, Rose is intriguing enough to him, that he wants to pursue something with her. And so when he kind of starts to bring that up to Marty, and Marty is just a jackass about it, and then is a total jackass about Greg and his career, and then flat out tells Greg that he isn't allowed to do what he wants to do, Greg realizes finally that this man isn't actually his friend, kicks him out of the van, drives back, plows through the fence, which is a fantastic bit of imagery, that busting down the wall imagery, drives up to the temple and jumps out, and he performs another song. And a lot of people forget about this song when they're talking about this episode. He literally rewrote this song in his head in the time between leaving town and driving back to the temple, and it sounds great. This guy is incredibly talented. And Rose comes back out and she's wearing the t-shirt, which is adorable, but she tells him that he has to leave, that humans don't live very long, and she doesn't want to eat up his entire lifespan. And she says it in a way where it's very clear that she's done this to other people before. She's kept them around when she shouldn't have, and they've kind of wasted their entire lives. And she basically says, I don't want you to miss out on everything that you want. And he says, everything I want is you. And she's just floored by it, and of course she lets him stay. And that's how they met, and that's the entire story. It ends on Steven and Greg deciding that despite how much of a douchebag Marty was, they're glad that he was in Greg's life, because otherwise Greg may have never met Rose, and he wouldn't have had such an easy time deciding to stay. And that's actually what I want to focus on talking about here in the little post-review. Like I said, the greatness of this episode is pretty self-explanatory. There's fantastic imagery here, great songs, and all these little bits and bobs that don't need to be there, all these little continuity details and Easter eggs that don't need to be there. And they all just come together to make a very enjoyable episode that I don't need to go into detail explaining why it's so enjoyable, so instead I want to talk about Greg's attitude towards Marty. Now, Marty is dead to him. He looks at Marty's picture and says, he's dead to me. But he still considers Marty a friend, because Greg is a good enough person that he looks at Marty and what Marty contributed to Greg having the life that he does now, and he says, this man may not have meant to do any of that, but he is still my friend because he brought me to this place. Let's be honest with ourselves here. How many of us could actually do that? If we were wronged by someone, even if we ended up in a better place for it, how many of us could actually still consider that person a friend? I'm betting the answer is not very many. I know I probably couldn't. Now, the other thing I want to talk about here is, this is just the story of how Greg and Rose met. This isn't a love story, this is an infatuation story. This is Romeo and Juliet, except instead of rival families, it's humanity and aliens, and instead of them killing themselves like morons, they go to live in a giant statue together. But it's not actually a love story, guys. That comes later, because up until this point, you still don't know why Greg and Rose worked long-term as a couple. But this episode definitely works to get you excited to find out why. All of that said, between the fantastic story, the fantastic music, the fantastic Easter eggs, all the great older designs for the gems, this is an episode that I love returning to, and I'd like to know what you guys think about it. If you have seen it, let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. Either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.